Always believe in yourself. Motivational story. Once upon a time, in a tiny forgotten town nestled at the edge of a storm-battered coastline, there was a boy named Kai. The wind howled through the trees and the rain fell in relentless sheets, battering the earth like 1,000 unseen hands. It seemed as though the storm would never end. The town, perched precariously on jagged cliffs where the waves crashed violently against the shore, was not a place where dreams flourished. It was a place where survival was a daily struggle, where the villagers, hardened by years of salt and wind, learned early to face the harsh realities of life. Their world was shaped by the seasons, the tides, and the land that had made them tough. But not Kai. His story would be different. The villagers were simple folk, fishermen, farmers, and craftsmen, living in modest homes with thatched roofs and worn wooden doors. Their hands were calloused from endless labor, their minds focused on the immediate, a day's work, a safe night, and a meal to fill their bellies. It was a world where ambition was a luxury, and aspirations were reserved for those with the means or the fortune to dream. The future, to them, was already written. It was the same as the past. Hard, unforgiving, and grounded in the survival of the fittest. Their children were groomed for the same life, trained in the same trades, and taught that there was no room for lofty dreams beyond the horizon. No one in the town had ever dared to reach for something more. It was an existence defined by the familiar rhythm of the tides, the daily struggles of making a living, and the acceptance that life would always be this way. But Kai was different. At an early age, he knew he didn't belong in the small, dimly lit room he shared with his parents. The walls, thick with the damp of the sea air, seemed to close in on him at times. His body was too frail, his hands too small for the rough nets his father had tried to teach him to weave. The weight of the tools, the burden of responsibility, was too much for his narrow shoulders. His heart, however, was a different matter. His heart was wide and full of dreams. Dreams that could not be confined to the narrow paths of the village or the craggy cliffs that had framed his childhood. Kai's dreams were wild, untamed, of far-off lands, of towering cities, of mastering the skies above and chasing the stars. The world he imagined was a world beyond the reach of the waves that battered the coastline. And yet, the more he dreamed, the more it seemed that his dreams were too big for the life he had been born into. But Kai didn't listen to the whispers. He would walk the winding paths that led to the cliffs, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his thoughts drifting far away. The wind would whip through his hair and the sea would crash below, a constant thunderous reminder of the world he longed to understand. But no matter how strong the pull of the ocean, no matter how deeply he felt the call of something greater, the whispers of doubt followed him. "No one rises above the waves here," they would say. "You're just a boy from a forgotten village. Who do you think you are, dreaming of the stars?" But Kai didn't listen. He kept his gaze on the horizon, on the place where the sea met the sky in an endless, unreachable expanse. There, on the edge of the world, his heart burned with a purpose that no one else seemed to understand. The ocean, dark and tempestuous, felt like the perfect metaphor for his dreams. Wild, untamable. But beneath the beauty of the waves was a danger, a reminder that dreams were often shattered by the force of the world around them. And yet, despite the dangers, Kai's resolve grew stronger with every crashing wave, every gust of wind. There was something about the sea that spoke to him, something deep within him that stirred with a longing to prove the world wrong, to rise above the waves, to show that he could be more than what the villagers had destined him to be. But each day the doubts surrounded him like a fog, thick and suffocating. Each day the voices grew louder, the sneers more biting. And still, Kai remained determined. One night, as the winds screamed louder than ever before, and the sea roared as though the world itself might be swallowed by the storm, something changed. The villagers who had lived through countless storms knew the danger. They had seen the fury of the ocean many times before. They had seen boats destroyed, homes flooded, lives lost to the storm. And so they huddled together in their homes, clutching their loved ones, whispering prayers in a language that Kai couldn't yet understand. They knew the storm was coming, and they knew what it would bring. But Kai had no intention of hiding. The storm did not frighten him. The storm, in fact, called to him. He paced the narrow streets of the village, feeling the ground tremble beneath him as the wind tore through the trees. The storm was fierce, unlike anything they had seen in years. But there was something else at play that night, something deeper, something that called to him from within, pulling him toward a destiny he couldn't ignore. As the lightning flashed and the thunder cracked above him, Kai stood at the edge of the village, his eyes wide, his heart pounding. The ocean churned below, its waves rising higher and higher, threatening to consume the land. But Kai didn't back away. He didn't retreat to the safety of his home. There was something inside him, something powerful, that told him this was his moment. This was the night that would define him. And so, with the storm raging around him, he began to run. His heart beat faster, the wind howling in his ears, the rain drenching him to the bone. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the feeling that surged within him, the belief that he could do something no one else had ever done. This was not about the storm. This was about proving something to himself, about finally embracing the strength that had always been there, buried beneath the layers of doubt and fear. Kai didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain: he would never stop running toward his dreams, no matter how fierce the storm. The world would see. And more importantly, he would finally see himself for who he was meant to be. Then, without warning, the night took a dark turn. A sharp, sickening crack split the air, cutting through the roar of the storm like a knife. The oldest man in the village, whose back had bent under the weight of countless seasons and storms, had slipped while trying to secure his roof against the brutal winds. He tumbled from the height, his body hitting the cold, unforgiving ground with a sickening thud. His breath rattled in the darkness, and the world around him seemed to swallow his cry. The wind howled, but no one heard him. Not the way the storm made every sound seem distant, distorted. As he lay there, struggling, calling out in pain, the village held its breath. They heard the cry. They knew the voice. But in the face of the storm, they froze. The night was thick with fear, a fear that clung to the villagers like an unshakable fog. The winds whipped around them, rattling their homes, and the fear of the storm's fury rendered them helpless, paralyzed by the very power they had come to accept as part of their existence. The storm was a monster, and in its presence, even the bravest seemed small. But not Kai. The moment he heard that desperate cry, something deep within him stirred, a feeling so strong, so immediate that he didn't even think. There was no hesitation, no inner debate. Without a second to spare, he thrust himself into the heart of the tempest. The rain pummeled his skin like ice. The wind howled in his ears like 1,000 voices warning him to stop. But nothing could make him turn back. He ran as fast as his legs would carry him, pushing through the darkness, fighting the forces that tried to rip him apart. The sea roared beneath the cliffs, waves crashing like thunderous drums in the night. The wind tried to knock him off his feet, but he kept moving, driven by something deeper than fear. This was his moment, his choice. In the midst of the fury, when everything seemed as though it would be swallowed by the storm, Kai found the old man. He was barely conscious, alone in the night, vulnerable. Kai's hands found the old man's limp body, and with every ounce of strength, he pulled him to safety. His heart hammered in his chest as he fought against the wind, dragging the man to shelter. It wasn't the storm that took everyone's breath away. It was Kai's courage, the raw strength that had always been inside him, waiting for the right moment to break free. He had never been weak. No, the only thing that had kept him bound, kept him from rising, was the belief that he wasn't enough. That was the storm Kai had been battling all along, the one that no one could see. When the storm finally passed and the clouds began to break, the villagers saw Kai in a new light. The boy they had once ridiculed, the dreamer they had written off as weak, was now the one who had saved them. They couldn't believe their eyes, but that was only the beginning of his journey. What they didn't know was that the storm wasn't over for Kai. In fact, it had only just begun. After the storm, while the village celebrated their safety, while they praised Kai as a hero, he retreated into himself. He spent the months that followed alone, wrestling with the storm inside him. The doubts, the fear, the nagging voice that whispered, "What if you're not enough? What if that night was a fluke?" He had done something incredible. Yes, he had saved a life, and yes, the villagers now saw him as a hero. But what if he wasn't worthy of their praise? What if the fear inside him would always return to haunt him? What if his dreams, those wild, unreachable dreams, were always too big for him? It was in those long, quiet months of solitude that Kai began to realize something profound. He realized that the greatest battle he had ever fought wasn't with the storm outside, nor with the villagers who doubted him. It was with the storm inside him. The battle between who he was and who he feared he might never become. The whispers in his mind that told him to stay small, to accept the life they had given him, to live within the boundaries of what others thought was possible. The hardest part wasn't facing the storm. It was facing his own self-doubt. It wasn't until years later, as Kai ventured beyond the familiar cliffs and traveled to new lands, that he truly began to understand. As he journeyed from town to town, he met people who had their own battles to face. He saw how others, too, fought with their own fears, doubts, and insecurities. He learned that the most powerful battle anyone can against the world outside, but the one within. The greatest test, he realized, wasn't whether the village believed in him, it was whether he believed in himself. And even as he ventured far from home, a part of him still whispered, "You're not enough. You're just a boy from a storm-ravaged town." But that's when it hit him. The fear, the doubt, the whispers, they weren't something to be defeated. They were part of the process. They were not enemies to be vanquished, but companions in the journey towards self-belief. The truth was, belief wasn't something you're born with. It's something you choose, something you create within yourself. The hardest battle Kai had ever faced wasn't the storm or the waves. It wasn't the challenges the world threw at him. The hardest battle was with his own reflection. The fear that told him he wasn't enough, that he couldn't rise above it all. As he stood at the edge of the world, gazing out over the ocean once more, Kai realized that belief in yourself wasn't given by the world. It was earned by the way you choose to face the storm. The storm inside. The storm would never stop. It would rage on in the world and within him. But it was up to him whether it would break him or strengthen him. And from that moment on, Kai carried the knowledge with him wherever he went. Belief, true, unwavering belief, is the secret to conquering everything. No matter where you come from, no matter the odds, no matter the storm. So now, as you read this, I want you to ask yourself, what is your storm? What is the voice that tells you that you're not enough? What is the fear that holds you back? If you've made it this far, leave a comment below with the words, "I am the storm," because you've just taken the first step in embracing the truth. The storm may never leave, but your belief in yourself can carry you through it. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, someone who needs to believe in themselves too, because there are so many out there who still don't know that the storm is not their enemy. Trust me, the best part of this story is still unfolding, and it's time for you to write your own chapter.